afternoon, everyone. Sorry we delayed a little. Delighted to welcome you all. We're mildly disappointed there are more people here. Some people have had to pull out at the last moment. This is our first annual review in public. We reviewed what we've done year after year, and we want to welcome you to our home. And we're particularly grateful to John Quinn, who's somewhere around. John is over there. This is John's building, and he has all those years given us the premises. This room we've used for courses with a little office down there. And it's great to have a physical home. If you read the papers and you hear what goes on in Galway, where they're concerned and looking for a writers' centre, and maybe in the future with many of the magnificent other buildings available and becoming available in Limerick, the City Council will give us our own premises, so that would be great too. But we've achieved a lot, and when we sat down and reviewed to produce this document, it's when you sit back and look at what you've achieved, we were very, very pleased with ourselves. And we thought it was time to say something about that actually in public. A whole variety of activities. We have a fantastic radio programme on Limerick City Community Radio, 2 brilliant presenters on it, and we cover a whole range of literature and books, both national and local, and we record the passing of great writers, the anniversaries. Very lively programme, and I'm delighted to say the station isn't big enough to get listening figures, but when I go out, even out in rural Bruff and places like that, people tell me they've listened to the programme, it's great. And because it goes out on the internet, you know, my nephew in South Africa has listened to it, so Limerick City Community Radio, our Between the Pages programme, goes really well. In this room, it's great and exciting to see some days, some Saturdays, other days, you come up here, and this large table upstairs in the middle of the room, and it's an activity, a room where people are writing, people are learning, people are listening, and those sort of courses have done so much, I think. Of course, there's a pile of books over there, Revival Press. We're up to what number now, Dominic?
Well, over 40.
Over 40 books published. Significant number of excellent books, both prose and poetry. We're on our way now, and some of you were present on our project of putting a literary trail together for Limerick to record the great names that have graced Limerick with their presence. We had a wonderful day up at the White House when President Higgins came down. We had a great day with Alfred McCourt in Souths. We have an annual commemoration for Robert Graves and the Loch Bar, and all those sort of things. And we have a couple more in line, and we'll be announcing those soon. We put events on in the Lime Tree. We put an annual literary cabaret on. We have upcoming a show about Charles Dickens. And if any of you looked at one of the Limerick's history sites, there's a lovely letter written from Limerick by Dickens to his agent. So this show and the information is on the internet and on our website. And finally, we have On the Nail, which is a wonderful, I think, poetry evening, where 2 guests start, and we've had lots of very, very fine readers and guests. But the second part of it, there's some really quality open mic sessions where people who perhaps arrive and tentatively do their first public reading, and then as time goes on, usually they come back and they've written a bit more in it, because it's a very kind audience. Mainly, everyone in the audience are writers themselves, generally. And it's wonderful to see somebody blossoming over a period of months as they make their first reading and then carry on. And of course, there are some well-known local poets who join us for the open mic session there. We also celebrate throughout the town at other times, and if you've been around the Hunt Museum, we had a session there on World War poets. If you walked by Key Bookstall at outside Tesco's in the shopping centre on World Book Day, you would see us celebrating World Book Day, bringing what we do right into the community, right into, as people go by, and it's nice to see people wondering what's going on there. And then they stop, and then they listen, and then they start talking, they're hearing poems read, and so on. You might have wondered, Jim was saying, he was complaining a little bit about the ribbons down on the door. They're red and yellow. He said, what's going on? We're Limerick. Well, Pat McMahon over there, he put them, because World Book Day started as a traditional Catalan day in the Catalan colours. And they record the birthdays of Shakespeare and Cervantes. So we always work to UNESCO's World Book Day. And again, bringing literature out to the open. Dominick will talk a little bit more about our aims and objectives. But we're delighted to see you here, and we hope you take away a copy of our review, and perhaps take two even, and spread the good news about, I think, the excellent work that Dominick and his colleagues, and I've joined them relatively recently, have done for so many years in this town, right across the range of literature. So now I'm going to ask Dominick Taylor, the director of Limerick Writers Centre, to speak to you. Thanks, Donal. Mr. Mayor, thank you for joining us today, and the members of the press. I'd also like to thank you for being here today. The Limerick Writers Centre is a non-profit literary organisation located in Limerick City. We believe that the craft of writing is a fundamental means of communicating and is open to people of all backgrounds and of all ages. Our annual review reflects our deep belief in community and creativity. Last Saturday, Tim Cunningham, the Limerick poet, had a poem published in the Arts and Books section of the Irish Times. And as the Irish Times noted, Tim Cunningham's most recent book was published by Revival Press. Revival Press is a publishing arm of the Limerick Writers Centre. Revival Press, along with Limerick Writers Centre Publishing, is an independent community publishing initiative which has now published over 40 titles, including books of poetry, prose, history and memoir. And many of our titles are on display here this morning. Now, I do not have to remind you that we live in a world dominated by large commercial publishers. In recent years, large media businesses, people who privately own radio, television, magazines and newspapers, have bought up more and more of the many traditional publishing houses. And we have now reached the stage where a small number of large conglomerates, perhaps 3 or 4, are in control of publishing and are in control of what we read. A noted German publisher recently and very tellingly reminded us that this domination of publishing by a small number of publishing houses will fundamentally change the way we read and what kind of books are available to us. He went on to say that small publishing houses or small publishing projects are run by people who do books because of their passion or belief, certainly not because of the profits they will generate. I would like to say that the work of the Limerick Writers Centre is also carried out by people because of their belief and their passion, and because of their love of writing, books and literature. Since its establishment in 2008, the Limerick Writers Centre has endeavoured to carve out a unique position in relation to writing and literature in Limerick. One of our key characteristics has been our accessibility. We willingly embrace and encourage diverse voices within the community. We believe that writing and literature, whether in the form of prose or poetry, matters in the way it has always mattered, to make sense out of our emotional lives, to show us the possibilities of language. Through our publishing, through our workshops, and through our public reading events, we want, in the words of the French philosopher, author and journalist Albert Camus, we want to bear witness to that in all of us which wants to live, which refuses to die. I want to dwell on this point for a moment by talking about the boxer Sonny Liston. Now, many of you may remember his heavyweight world championship fights with Floyd Patterson and Muhammad Ali in the early 60s. and a description of Sonny Liston by the writer James Baldwin. Now, Baldwin was a great writer and a great human being. It is said that Baldwin believed that every person is a carrier of the divine spark. Baldwin talks about interviewing Sonny Liston before one of his great fights. Liston sat opposite me at the table, sideways, head down, waiting for the blow, he says. Now, I'm sure that Baldwin is not talking about the blows received in the ring here. I believe that he's talking about the blows, the ordinary blows, but the devastating blows of life that silence people into limiting their human potential. For Liston knows, as only the inarticulately suffering can, Baldwin reminds us, Liston knows just how inarticulate he is. Sonny Liston had suffered a great deal in life. It is in his face, in the silence of that face, and in the curiously distant light in the eyes, a light which rarely signals because there have been so few answering signals. I really do not mean to suggest that he does not know how to talk, says Baldwin. He is inarticulate in the way we all are, but more has happened to us than we know how to express. Baldwin felt that Liston had a long story to tell, which no one wants to hear. And it is in this context that the Limerick Writers Centre tries to facilitate people. Facilitate people who have a story to tell. Facilitate people who write poetry for people who don't have poetry in their lives. Through literary engagement with words, stories, and poems, we try to expose writers to authors and styles that might open up their craft. Through this, we hope they can remember their lives and write their own stories and gain the courage to tell them. And telling your story is just as important, if not more important, as writing it. It's like turning a private belief into a political act. Simone de Beauvoir, the French feminist and philosopher, said when speaking about autobiographical writing, and I believe to an extent it applies to all writing, that it not only allows us to tell ourselves our own history, but also to archive our memory, to create a document of the times. Today we are living in a time of uncertainty and insecurity, a time in which every day someone is selling cheap illusions of happiness, a time which our own poet Desmond O'Grady warns us about in his great poem Tipperary, that is giddy with the temptations of those bogey people's trinket stalls. It is important in these days, in these times, for people to discover that there are other ways to understand and critique the world and of living ethically. We believe that through the transformative power of words, we can achieve this and renew the connection between human beings. I spoke earlier of Sonny Liston, who was raised in poverty and through boxing shared his story with the world and escaped the suffocating narrative of his birth. When people feel ground down and disempowered, surely one of the greatest remedies for health and for general well-being is education. Education, even more than money, even more than a family income, is still the decisive factor. As the Spanish writer Elvira Lindo wrote in a Madrid newspaper about Frank McCourt, McCourt himself a great teacher who understood the value of education. She said of him, he was a man who spent 3 decades as a teacher inoculating young people with the sweet venom of literature. I want to say that we are guided and influenced by such thoughts and ideas in the Limerick Writers Centre. We are guided by the works of some of the writers I have quoted, James Baldwin, Elvira Lindo, Desmond O'Grady, and Frank McCourt. Indeed, we find sometimes writers who write about their lived experience, whether in prose or poetry, are often marginalized by mainstream cultural conventions. The result of this marginalization is that a large proportion of a writer's experience and how they make sense of the world can be lost to future generations. It is to this end, and in this review, that we propose an arc of culture, which, like Noah's Ark, takes on board a small part of
everything. Nothing is excluded. As Noah, in the biblical sense, took both clean and unclean animals into his ark, our ark will be wide and inclusive of all forms of writing. And like Noah's ark, we hope that the work which we encourage and publish will survive the flood of time that engulfs everybody and everything, and that the work of the Limerick Writers Centre will leave a legacy which will enrich future generations. The question we must ask ourselves is, what is worth preserving and who chooses? Left to the vagaries of the modern day market, only what is deemed of literary value by a select few will be preserved for future ages. We take the view that by celebrating all writers equally, and if we have the sensitivity to perceive the value of diverse voices, that our approach will enrich the entire community. We bring together groups of people who value literature not just for its literary value, but who see its transformative power both for the individual and society. And we believe that stories, poems, diaries, memoirs do, as Seamus Heaney suggests, function as bearers of value. Writers, especially poets and novelists, will continue to describe and teach us how to see the world differently and from a less self-interested perspective. For readers, books and poems offer an opportunity for us to interpret and find meaning in an increasingly fragmented world. And at the end of the day, as Samuel Beckett rightly stated, words are all we have. We each have something to say that describes ways of living in the world, and as such, are an indispensable part of the tapestry that goes up to make up our lives. We believe it is important, again quoting Desmond O'Grady, to live full lives, leave some record. It is our view then that writers and writer centres play an important role where groups and individuals can gather and make contact, sharing and engaging creatively with each other, and as such are worthy of support by the larger community. The Limerick Writers Centre ethos has always been one of participation for everyone. Finally, I would like to thank everybody, patrons and supporters who have helped the centre since 2008. And as Donal so rightly said, a very special word of thanks to our landlord, John Quinn, whose support from day one has been the key element in the success of the centre. Thank you very much. Just roughly, quickly going through this document. One of the headings, we reclaimed Robert Graves for Limerick. His great-grandfather was Bishop of Limerick, and every year now we commemorate his presence in Limerick with an event. We're very proud of some of the comments sent to us about the Writers Centre for our brochure. Hugh Maguire from the Hunt Museum values the relationship, and it says it's one that he wants to strengthen over the years, as we've done so many readings down there. We had a great day. Una was there and has done great work in the city, ensuring that Frank McCourt has been remembered well. And we had a great day up at South Spa when Alfie came and we unveiled a plaque to Frank McCourt. And Alfie was there and he said it was a joyful noise. Because he said, I can't just speak without singing. So he sang a couple of songs for us. But one of the ones I really like, I got involved, I was unwise enough at some event to offer to carry a box of books for Dominick Taylor. I carried the box of books down, I think it was at the university somewhere, and he must have thought, this fella can carry boxes of books, and I got involved. But I have found, and as Dominic Ryan says in his comments, Donal Ryan, the work of Limerick Writers Centre for the arts and wider community in Limerick and its environment is immeasurable. And this is what I found about the people involved. It is run by some of the most passionate, dedicated and selfless people I've ever met. It's a resource, a refuge, a beacon, a repository of energy from which we can all draw, and a powerhouse of independent publishing. They're wonderful words from Donal Ryan and they're great things. I'm delighted now to ask our Mayor to come and Gerry O'Dea, Councillor Gerry O'Dea, to come and speak. And Gerry has he was present. He came at very short notice and came to the unveiling of the Frank McCourt plaque, and we're delighted he's here with us today.
Good afternoon, everybody. It is afternoon here. And thank you for having me here, ladies and gentlemen. I suppose, firstly, in addition to welcoming you all, Donal has mentioned many of the things I was going to say. And that's quite all right, because in a way it makes sense, because therefore maybe they should be repeated. So I suppose, firstly, I would like to say I'm delighted to join with Dominick and the Limerick Writers Centre in celebrating this launch of their first annual review. The Writers Centre is marking almost a decade of existence, having established in 2008, and along with numerous books and poetry collections has published over 40, nearly 50 by the end of 2016. The monthly On the Nail was mentioned, and open mic public performances at the Loch Bar, and they have been a big favourite among the literary and arts community in Limerick for several years now. They certainly are a place to inspire and be inspired, as the annual review puts it. Several notable writers, local, national and international, have been guest readers at this event. Here at 12 Barrington Street, the home of the Limerick Writers Centre, and I'd like to acknowledge Mr. Quinn, workshops take place on a regular basis, providing opportunities for aspiring writers to learn their craft. And every month, three groups of writers gather here to have their work critiqued and improved. Donal also mentioned that in a new departure this year, the Limerick Writers Centre team present a programme every Saturday lunchtime on Limerick City and Community Radio. And I know the people involved in the station there, and like yourselves, they're very giving and selfless of their time.
Absolutely.
Another important initiative of the Limerick Writers Centre is the recent inauguration of the Limerick Literary Trail. And I have been lucky enough to be at Souths on the day Alfie McCourt was there, and they unveiled the plaque to Frank. It's hoped that this will become part of an itinerary for locals and visitors to Limerick who wish to walk in the footsteps of writers who found inspiration here in the city. The strength of our literary heritage is a significant component of the history of our city. A literary walking tour will allow people to trace the footsteps, visit the inspirational haunts of our local writers, several of whom, and particularly Frank McCourt, have made a major contribution to defining what Limerick and Irish literature is about. I suppose, on a more personal note, what I find most appealing about the Limerick Writers Centre is the selfless work that goes on here, and the absence of any self-aggrandisement. It's my first time to visit the centre, but I've been engaged with Dominick over different occasions, and I must say, the Writers Centre, on behalf of the city, I would like to thank Dominick and his board for their work, their selfless work, and I wish them well with their ongoing and their inspirational endeavours. I suppose on a finishing note, I will be taking away some copies of the annual review. I'm delighted that I've read through it, and it's great reading. I suppose it will be hard next year to. You've had 8 years to get into this one, so I hope you can come up with enough material for next year's review. But I suppose on a finishing note, I'll take some of Donal's comments back, perhaps regarding Culture House and the engagement of Limerick City and County Council, and perhaps we can endeavour to strengthen those links, and it'll be my pleasure to do it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And finally, we do hope you'll take some copies and pass copies of the document on. We're going to finish with one of our members of our board, Fiona. Fiona is a poet herself, a playwright, a novelist, and she lectures in creative writing at the University of Limerick, and is unstinting again in her work for Limerick Writers Centre. And Fiona is really going to talk about words, writing, and Limerick Writers Centre.
So good afternoon and a very warm welcome to you again, and thank you all for coming, especially Gerry, to launch our review. It's now for me to round off the formalities and encourage you to have a coffee and a snack and join in the crack. Poetry, you see. Talk about writing to each other, meet other writers, network, mingle in convivial, like-minded company, because as everybody who so far has pointed out, this place, you people, the Limerick Writers Centre is, of course, about writing. And my role, I suppose, is to refer to the art of writing and the soul of writers. And as you've heard, we cover an enormous range of activities concerned with this writing business. Our existence and our success is because writing is very important. We exist for writers and potential writers, and it's important for individuals and for Limerick. We exist for writers. We bring literature and indeed all manner of writing to the forefront, the front page, if you like. And we exist to beat that writer's block, to release the poet trapped within. And whatever metaphor turns you on, kindling a spark, but what we're doing is putting Limerick writers at the forefront of all this business in Ireland. I think we do that already, and I think we do it very successfully. Let me quote a few writers on writing, on the theme. I think it was Somerset Maugham who said, "There are 3 rules for writing a novel. Unfortunately, nobody knows what they are." He's right, of course, because every novelist or anyone with a story to tell is their own master. And here at the Centre, we would encourage individual mastery. We don't lay down rules, well, not very many anyway, but what we do is to facilitate. Another writer, Stephen King, however, made a couple of rules that I would agree with. He once said, if you want to be a writer, you must do 2 things above all else. You must read a lot and write a lot. And that's what we hope to encourage our participants to do. And the wonderful Maya Angelou said, "There is no greater agony than bearing an untold story inside you." So let's relieve you of that agony and get that story out, like a grumbling appendix. Finally, I'd just like to share a short piece of writing with you. It's a poem by William Stafford, a writer that I, for one, admire enormously, not least because he came to writing very late. He was 46 when he first wrote. Actually, that's quite young, really. But I suppose it depends on how old you are. He was 46 when he first wrote and was first published. And of course, our own Frank McCourt was 66 when he first started writing. I find that most encouraging. Back to Stafford. Once he started, and this is impressive, he wrote a daily journal until the day he died. He wrote a staggering 22,000 poems. 22,000! And we struggled to get an anthology out. But at least 3,000 of those 22,000 poems were published in his lifetime. And this is one of them. One's enough. And it's called When I Met My Muse. I glanced at her and then took my glasses off, and they were still singing. They buzzed like a locust on the coffee table and then ceased. Her voice belled forth and the sunlight bent. I felt the ceiling arch and knew that nails up there took a new grip on whatever they touched. I am your own way of looking at things, she said. When you allow me to live with you, every glance at the world around you will be a sort of salvation. And I took her hand. So, writers, potential writers, the Limerick Writers Centre takes you by the hand and let us be your muse. Thank you. We'll see you again. Don't forget to write.
And finally, Dominic always says, we never get through an event, even a radio programme, without me mentioning James Joyce. And we're delighted the Mayor is here today. On the 16th of June in Brough, we will celebrate Bloomsday in Brough once again. And in Brough, there's a family, the Clancy family. One of them a well-known referee in rugby. One of them a grumpy landlord who runs the local pub. But a large family. And the connection, why do you have Bloomsday in Brough? The drive to the Mayor here, one of his predecessors, George Clancy, the Mayor of Limerick, who was murdered by the Black and Tans. George Clancy was one of those Clancys from Brough. But much more importantly to me, as a Joycean, he was a great friend of James Joyce. He was at UCD with James Joyce, and he was one of the few people. Joyce was also a very grumpy man, as a lot of geniuses are. He was one of the few people that called him by his Christian name, he called by Christian name, and he influenced James Joyce significantly, particularly with his attitude to Irish nationalism and the Irish literary revival. And Joyce, as you say, you have to be careful with writers or they'll write about you. But Joyce wrote about him. And in Portrait of the Artist, the character of Madden Davin in Stephen Hero is based on George Clancy. So I think it was great. Dominic reciprocated my helping with Limerick Writers Centre in the last couple of years. There's several people here present who've helped with Bloomsday in Brough. And it's good that, all those years ago, James Joyce and the Mayor of Limerick, good friends, and we have a good friend of Limerick Writers Centre here today. Thank you for coming. We're all about words. I hope you've enjoyed some words, and we're delighted to see you. Thank you so much for coming.